Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today we have two guests, Harley Schlanger and Bill Binney. Harley is an historian, a national spokesman. He's been covering the financial industry since the 80s for LaRouchePAC. That's LaRouchePAC.com. We also have Bill Binney. Bill is a former highly placed intelligence official with the United States National Security Agency turned whistleblower. He retired after 30 years with the agency, and I am very happy to have and honored to have both on the X22 Report Spotlight. Harley, Bill, welcome to the Spotlight.
Yeah, thank you.
Good to be with you, Dave.
Hey, thanks for being with me today. And I wanted to start off with what is happening with the Mueller report. We know the summary has come out, and we know that the House, Nadler, Schiff, and the rest are making a huge deal. They want the full report, unredacted. They want everything. Harley, what is your take on why they want the entire report?
I think the main point is they're very disappointed that there was no collusion reported by Mueller, that the obstruction charge was pretty much passed on by Mueller, and the people who are demanding this have been part of a soft coup against the president since the time of the election, and they're not going to stop, especially Adam Schiff. And I think the danger here is that there are some things that did come out in the report that have to be corrected. And I don't mean in terms of Trump, I mean in terms of Mueller's findings. And Bill is certainly the person to talk about that in terms of the continued assertion that there was Russian hacking that was the beginning of the whole case. But I think more importantly, there's some people who are saying, let's just put it behind us. And I think in the case of the kind of criminal activity that was done against President Trump, the lying, the corruption inside the Justice Department, that if you don't investigate it fully and bring the perpetrators to some form of justice, then they'll just keep doing this. And Bill, you certainly have a lot of experience with these people. What is your view? Is that pretty much how you feel?
Yeah, I kind of liken it to an alcoholic. If you can't admit you're an alcoholic, you can't fix it. So if we can't admit that we have a problem here with our own government working and violating the constitutional rights of other parts of the government and trying to subvert the entire governmental process, and we can't admit to that, then we can't fix it, and it's just going to surface again and just continually fester under the visual sight of basically most of the population of the country, but it'll still be there. It's like this subverting property of bureaucracy. I call them, I liken them to the Praetorian Guard, because after all, if you think about it for a minute, especially with the intelligence agencies, they're the ones who feed all the information into the decision makers. That means the president and all of his cabinet ministers and so on. So they control what information they get to see, so it's like they can shadow block or anything they want that they don't want them to see. In other words, that might influence their decision in a certain way that maybe the bureaucrats in the Praetorian Guard don't want to happen. So that's the way they can control that and actually manipulate the leadership of the country.
Bill, you think that's one of the reasons? You think that's one of the reasons that Brennan and people like that are so upset that Trump questions the integrity of the intelligence agencies?
Absolutely, yes. And in fact, these are the people who need to be investigated. I mean, along with the investigation shouldn't stop. Russian interference should be looked at in terms of the Steele dossier. And who participated in that? Well, there was the DNC, the FBI, the DOJ, and basically the intelligence people. So that was all part of the DNC paying for it originally, and also MI6 from the British side. That's the equivalent of their CIA. They also, the guy who Mike Steele was from MI6. So that's kind of a connection, international connection. Then he relied on some Russian people to help pull together that and create the fabricated dossier, which has never been verified by anybody. So that's direct interference into our entire process. That started the investigation. That started all this participation and arguing about the Russian interference, for Trump, when in fact it was against Trump, as far as I can see.
And Bill, one thing that most people overlook is that the initial connection to Brennan was through the GCHQ, which I'm sure you're familiar with. They came over and said they were picking up strange indications of Russian interference. Do you have any thoughts about that?
No, but I just think that I really, in this case, I don't really trust the process here in terms of who was doing what to subvert the first of all the campaign for Trump's campaign. Actually, they were looking at him long before the campaign, but even during the campaign and after it, I mean, those kinds of things were going on. And for example, in relationships between NSA and GCHQ, they each do the same things for one another, and they all share their data. And it's all, NSA basically has become the storage facility for the worldwide bulk collection of data on every citizen in the world, including all British citizens and all U.S. citizens. So this is not just metadata, by the way. They tell you that, but that's a lie. It's also content, phone transcripts, digital communications like emails and file transfers and chatter and short messages across the phones and things like that, all that, and also financial transactions. All this things being stored.
With all the exposure of that, they haven't pulled back at all, have they?
No, they haven't. No. In fact, they're talking about, the recent article, I think, in the New York Times came out. So they're going to stop this, bulk acquisition of metadata on phone calls from the telecom companies, basically. Well, that is not the only source of that information. The major source of that data comes from the upstream program, which is the fiber optic taps on the lines around the world, and they have 100 taps inside the United States alone on the Fairview program, and that's collecting all the metadata and content simultaneously. So they could really throw away their metadata program, or even the targeted requested data in the PRISM program from the companies involved in that program. So that they don't really. That was basically to cover up and make sure that they got everything that was possible, so that if they missed something in upstream, they could pick it up from the records from the telecommunication companies or service providers. That was the way to fill in the stuff they were missing, but they don't really need that now because they've got so much going on in terms of taps on fiber lines all over the place. It's not. I don't think they're missing very much at all.
Well, Bill, with all that capability, how did they not pick up, had there been a Russian hack, that it occurred?
Well, see, that was the basic evidence from, that's why, first of all, that the director of NSA said that the NSA has moderate confidence that the Russians hacked. That was in the ICA. The CIA and FBI had high confidence, and NSA only had moderate. Now, what that tells you, first of all, the only one that matters in that deal is NSA. FBI and CIA don't have anywhere the capabilities that NSA does. So NSA is the one looking at all these networks. And if any packets were transferred from the DNC to anywhere in the world, they would have at least one packet. And that's all they need to know where it came from and where it went. So the point is, if NSA had those packets, they would have absolute confidence on who hacked and who did and where it went. And when they did it and how much they got. So it's not a question of not knowing. The fact that they didn't know said they didn't have packets, said that the hack did not occur. That was my initial impression back in August of 2016, and that's what I was saying at the time.
And then, Bill, you did the real forensics on a couple of occasions. I think it'd be very useful for you to just summarize what you discovered from looking at this question of hacking versus an inside job.
Yeah, well, first of all, the first thing they threw out there was Goosefer 2. He came up like in, I think, 15th of June or somewhere around there of 2016, and said, "Yeah, I'm over here. I hacked it for the Russians, And he said he hacked the DNC. So we went on the assumption to say, okay, let's look at the data, and he put data out there for us to look at. That was his big mistake. Okay, when he did that, now some of us could look at this and turn all the bits around and see what it really meant and what was really true and what wasn't. So when we looked at it, we saw that the transfer rates of the data coming because every file they would put out a file with a dimension, a name and a dimension, the number of characters in the file, and then a timestamp. Then the next file, number of characters, and a timestamp. so that you could calculate the numbers of characters passed over the difference in time. So that gives you the rate of transfer. So we calculated the rate of transfer for every file ultimately, and when we came up with this I was doing with Duncan Campbell in the UK, and then with that we came up with the highest rate of 49.1 megabytes per second. And so we immediately, back in July of 2017, we sent out an initial note from VIPS, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, saying, the rates of transfer told us that this was not a hack; it did not go across the Atlantic, and so on. And we had a number of individuals inside the VIPS who thought, well, it could be. They still believed it could go at that rate. That's because they were looking at their local networks where you could have a very high-speed transfer, like gigabit lines. You could easily transfer that data for short distances. But you don't have a gigabit line across the Atlantic to Europe and all that. So that's where it falls down. So we said, okay, if you believe that, we're going to try and test it. So we did. We tested it from Albania, Serbia, the Netherlands, and the UK. To see at the transfer rates. And the highest we got for that were from between data centers in New Jersey and London. And that was 12 megabytes per second. That's less than 1/4 the necessary transfer rate that we already calculated from the files that Gooser 2 had put on the web. So that told us that was not a hack. But all those the speeds coming down for those files all matched with a thumb drive on a computer. That was all compatible with that. So we basically said, hey, this is basically a local download and not a long distance hack, which was getting back to what Gooser 2 was claiming, that it was a hack from Russia. That's what's false. So, and then later on, when we looked at the data that Gooser 2 put out, he put a set of data out for the 5th of July of 2016 and another set that was data. But if you looked at the two data sets and only looked at minutes and seconds, you could merge the two files without conflict. So in other words, in the files for the 5th of July were filled by the data from the 1st of September, which meant that Gooser 2 was playing with the data. He had one download, split it into two, and did a range change on the date and the hour into one, and just put it out as two different dates and said, here, I hacked them once and they couldn't stop me, so I hacked them again, But in fact, that meant that he was playing with the data. He was playing with us. He was manipulating facts and data and trying to bamboozle us, basically. So a little bit of disinformation, and that said that this whole thing for Gooser 2 was a fabrication. And yet that's what Rosenstein based some of his indictment on. That's another fabrication. That was that part. Now, the other part came out when we decided to say, okay, once WikiLeaks had posted the data for the DNC, that is, the data that they originally did for, starting, I think, in late June, early July. That data was what we now focused on to look at, and we had some other people helping us in the UK. And it turns out that when you looked at that data, this is the DNC data itself. This is the stuff they claimed that the Russians hacked and gave to WikiLeaks. This is the data that WikiLeaks posted. Okay, so we're looking at the data link that WikiLeaks posted that was the DNC data, the Hillary stuff and the DNC stuff. So, and we looked at like 500 files there. And each of those files had a property that showed the last modified time for each file. Well, there were 500 files, and all 500 of them that we looked at ended in an even number. That is, the random probability of something like that happening, you see, if you modify something, you have an equal chance of having it end in an odd number or an even number, at a time, like 01 or 02 seconds or whatever, 03, 04. So they're all even, all 500. So the random probability of that happening was one chance in 2 to the 500th power, which is like a really small number. It's the orders of magnitude better than DNA matching, by the way. So that's the way I look at it. But anyway, so that says there's a program doing this. Now, what is the program? Well, the program is it comes like it's a fat file transfer result or a property. That is file table allocation when you read it to a data storage device, like a thumb drive or a CD-ROM. So that showed that the data was downloaded not across the web, but onto a storage device, and then transported a distance, whatever that distance was, before WikiLeaks had it to post. Now, the Podesta emails that WikiLeaks posted did not show that property. So we knew WikiLeaks was not doing that. So it was a case then of where did this download occur? And since NSA says absolutely nothing about it, then we basically infer the download occurred with somebody on the high-speed net or on the network that allowed them to access the DNC servers. So it looked like it was an inside job for us. I mean, Mueller obviously avoided this. As far as I can see, he didn't say anything about this. So this is really a major problem for him to make any assertions about a hack, because it says there's a download. Well, where did the download occur? And he has to prove where it is. Otherwise, any lawyer worth his salt would say, "Hey, there's evidence of a download, and it looks like an inside job. So why are you accusing the Russians for hacking to get it when you can't do that? This is a property that says it's not a hack."
Bill, that brings up, I think, a very important question that I'd like your thoughts on, and then I'm sure Dave has some questions also. But given what you just went through, whether it's Guccifer, whether it's the inside job download, obviously there was a lot done to pull off this coup. Why do you think what you sometimes call the shadow government or the deep state made so much effort to stop Donald Trump? What do you think is behind this?
Well, for me, it's several things. First of all, he's not an insider. President Trump is not, didn't come from the inside of the existing bureaucratic structure. He's not a politician, right? He's not a Democrat. I mean, he's not really a politician, Republican, or a Democrat. So he's not a politician. So he's not from their arena either. And also, he doesn't need money. He's got his own money. He isn't influenced by money. So that means that this guy's a real threat, especially if he starts doing things that make them look really bad. That is, them being the politicians. The politicians who have basically got us to where we are in all kinds of messes like, 22 trillion in debt, endless wars, all kinds of infrastructure problems not dealt with, all kinds of problems, the border not dealt with, all the kinds of things that politicians have failed at doing. If he starts succeeding at that, he's going to make them look like garbage. And so they've got to stop him in any way they can. So they try to, gang up on him and try to divert his attention to other things so he doesn't succeed. When in fact he's not focusing on that, doing the right thing, starting to do the proper job and making sure that things happen and that he succeeds. And that's exactly what these people were so afraid of. An outsider coming in and making them look really bad. And that's what he's absolutely done.
Bill, and actually, one more question. Okay. I'm sorry, let me just get this out because it follows the trend you're developing. Clearly, what you reported on the downloading is crucial. And I know you offered to present it to Mueller and he showed no interest. I think it's really important, and I'd like your thought on this, that there be a full investigation of the Justice Department networks, the FBI, the Democratic Party, Brennan, people like that, and the connection to the British, the Steele dossier, and so on. In other words, what I'm calling a time of reckoning. Do you think that's necessary?
Oh, absolutely, it is. Otherwise, it's going to continue. I mean, if you don't face this problem and fix it, it's going to continue and fester and it's going to resurface. So you have to deal. I mean, you have to. When Obama came in, he said he didn't want to look back. That's because he wanted to adopt all the things that they were doing, and that's what he did. And he doubled down on some of like the spying. He doubled down on that, so that meant that all this stuff was continuing, all these criminal acts that are going back on the background in violation of the Constitution and any number of laws. If you don't face that, it's always going to be there under the surface and then pop up now and then whenever the shadow government wants to do something. So it's absolutely important to face the problem and fix it. And the only way to do that is to have a deep investigation into all this through, some other, I don't know if you want a special prosecutor, but certainly some kind of commission that it has to be transparent not the 9/11 Commission.
And
That
definitely,
9/11 Commission wasn't transparent, you know.
definitely declassification of all files, the release of all interrogatories
including
from
the
FBI.
FISA court stuff. Absolutely, the FISA court stuff is the kind of the key to get started.
Bill, I wanted to go and talk about Hillary Clinton's email, because you worked in the NSA. I mean, she deleted a lot of her email. Did the NSA, were they collecting and do they have the missing email?
The answer is yes, I think they do.
So
because, you know, they had the taps. I mean, I've got a list of all the locations of the tap points inside the United States. I know where they are to the building because I got it through Google, using Google on the web for both the Fairview and Stormbrew programs. Those are AT&T and Verizon. Those are the two companies involved, and that's their network, and those are the tapping points on their fiber lines.
So it doesn't matter that she deleted them. Trump being in the position that he's in, he pretty much, I'm assuming, knows almost everything.
You see, that's where it comes into point where this Praetorian Guard doesn't necessarily tell them what they know. This is where that comes in. So when you have that kind of information and you don't want, I mean, that's why I was saying to Director Pompeo when he was at CIA that these intelligence agencies, even his own, was lying to him and the president and the U.S. public. They're not telling them the truth. I mean, these people have this data, and I know they do. So, I mean, there's no excuse for them not coming out with it and saying, this is really what happened. And when they don't say that, you know they're lying to you.
Well, I mean, I remember in the beginning that he wasn't going to use the intelligence reports. He was going to depend on the military intelligence. I mean, is there any connection between the military intelligence and NSA where they might be working together?
They are. In fact, it's the NSA CSS, for example. CSS is Combined Security Service. That means the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine components of SIGINT. They all fall under NSA. That's why the director of NSA is a general, 3-star, now a 4-star, I guess. But that's why he is military, because that military commands are underneath his administration.
So, I mean, if we look at it from that point of view, I mean, do you think the military is feeding him that information?
I do not know if that's true, although they certainly would have the opportunity to be able to see some of that. So it would be possible for them to see that kind of thing and report it. For example, in I think they have about 2,000 transcribers doing phone call transcriptions of high priority phone calls that are assessed by algorithms and presented to them. That's down in Fort Gordon, Georgia, and they have a priority scheme for all these transcriptions, the human transcriptions of phone calls. Otherwise, the evidence I've been seeing so far says they're doing it with programs like Dragon and the kinds of programs that exist to do transcripts. And they can get you up at least an 80% accuracy, I think, of the transcript of a phone conversation. Once you get to that level, you can use algorithms to prioritize and highlight certain ones that you want to push to people to do a full transcription of. I mean, that's why Tim Clementi, that former FBI agent, could say that about the phone call between the Tsarnaev brother and his wife before the attack, the bombing in Boston. That's why he could come on CNN and say after that they were investigating questioning the wife about that conversation. If she didn't tell the truth, they had ways of getting back to it. Well, the ways they have getting back to it is they've got the audio stored for a period of time, and they've also got these transcripts, and I'm sure they prioritize that for a human transcript of the data to get a more complete, accurate translation. So, I think that's just an example of what they're doing with voice and the taps inside and outside the United States, all around the world.
Well, one question I have for you, because this is where you got in trouble with the NSA, is that with all this capability, are we safer because of their ability to find terrorists and threats, or is this more directed at just keeping tabs on all of us?
It's more directed at keeping tabs on everybody, and including getting leverage on everybody, because that gives you knowledge about everybody, and you can look into if somebody's doing something you don't like, you can look into their data and see if there's anything that you can use to leverage against them. I maintain that's what they did with Jim Risen and Jim Rosen and the Associated Press. Elliot Spitzer, get rid of him because he was going after the bankers for defrauding people, and so you have to get rid of those people, protect the bankers, things like that. And so that's what this kind of capability of collecting everything gives them. Also, it gives them leverage on all the members of parliaments of every country in the world. Tapping the phones of Angela Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, and things like that, and all the other leaders of the world gives you insight into what they're thinking and what they're planning. So that's the kind of thing, that's kind of information they're interested in getting, and that's the way they're approaching it. And if you have the capability to do these electronically, do it in bulk for the entire population, that's even better. I mean, I always look at a quote from Wolfgang Schmidt, a former East German lieutenant colonel in the Stasi, East German Stasi. He said about the NSA program, he said, and it was published, I think, in the Washington Post in 2013, summer of 2013. He said about the NSA program, he said, for us, this would have been a dream come true.
Oh, my God.
So, it tells you what we're doing. We are becoming, we're doing to ourselves what the terrorists wanted done but could never achieve. And we're destroying our own democracy and republic. And we're also infecting and destroying all the other democracies in the world, because all of those are following our lead.
Bill, this idea of declassifying documents, whether it's 9/11 documents, Kennedy assassination, all the records that were kept by Mueller and the Justice Department, FBI, and so on, are those available? Are those? Is it really possible to do a declassification that would be useful for prosecuting these perpetrators?
Oh, absolutely. And I brought this point up with the director of CIA, Pompeo, when he was down there. And he said, "Oh, it's classified data." I said, "Yeah, but just take for example the exceptions in history, like JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President Kennedy, declassified the U-2 photographs of the intermediate and medium range ballistic missiles in Cuba, the Russian missiles, and that was a very sensitive talent keyhole type program. So when he did that, that because we were in a position where it was a very serious situation, we were actually at DEFCON 2, perhaps even going to nuclear war. So he did that, and then again, President Reagan, after the Korean airline shoot down, he declassified all the data relative to that, and had it introduced in the UN, just like President Kennedy. They had that evidence in the UN. Well, those transcripts were actually the recordings of a Japanese collection of Russian air-to-ground and control of the fighters, where the Russians were actually saying, "Shoot the fight." They were ordering the fighters to shoot down the airplane, the KAL airline. So those are the cases where you have serious situations, and they declassify whatever evidence is necessary, and classification be damned, it's too serious, Well, I look at the same thing. This is our republic. It's in danger of being destroyed by these processes. And so this is an extremely serious problem. So if there's anything there that's related in any way, in FISA court submissions, anything, they should declassify and make it public, and then let the public make a decision as to what should be done. Don't let it up to the Praetorian Guard and the bureaucrats in these agencies, or any of the advisors, or long-time people involved in government, because they have a vested interest in perpetuating the current situation. You need to have it out in the open where everybody can see what's really going on, and then we can make an informed decision. Right now, we can't, because they're not keeping us informed. We're being lied to.
Well, what do you think people have to do to make sure this does happen? Because clearly the Praetorian Guard, as you call it, is not going to self-expose. And it looks as though the president is saying that he wants to declassify. Nunes and a few congressmen are saying they're going to declassify. Barr could certainly make an order. But do you think this has to become part of a demand from the population? How do we get this thing moving?
Yeah, I think we have to get that. And first of all, the only person that's able to declassify things and order that is the president. He is the head of the agency and of the entire administration. The administration sets the rules for classification. So he sets the rules. It's Executive Order 13526. I always point to Section 1.7, which says you cannot have these things, anything that's evidence of crime, fraud, waste, abuse, corruption. If you have evidence of that, you cannot keep it classified. You must declassify it. And those are the things that are signed by the president. So he determines what the classification rules are. And he can say, I want these declassified, and order it. It doesn't, and anybody can object, but he still has it's his authority to be able to do that. And he's the only one that has that. That's why I said, back when Rosenstein issued that indictment, I mean, his indictment had a bunch of records of GRU agents coming into a certain point and going from one point to the other in the DNC network. And some people mistakenly thought that data came from NSA. I said, no, that's not NSA data, and that's very simple. Anything that, excuse me, that NSA does is classified. So if they're going to put that NSA data in there, they have to redact it because it's classified. Otherwise, as Rosenstein just automatically did it, he doesn't have the authority to do that, by the way. Only the president does. So if he did that and it was from NSA and it was classified, then he's violating criminal acts out of the Code 18 codes of the United States government. So he's basically violating the law, committing felonies. So and I know that they wouldn't do that. So this is basically data from a third party, like CrowdStrike or something. If somebody is feeding that data into them, saying this is the truth, when in fact the FBI never had control of that data. They didn't have continuous control of the evidence to show that, and so it won't hold up in a court of law.
Bill, can the president go back in time, like you mentioned 9/11, JFK, can he go back and read the information and say, oh, yes, look, there was a crime? Oh, so he can do that.
Yeah, so he can do that. He can do anything he wants to. It's his authority. He has the authority to do that.
I think the key thing here is that, first of all, I want to commend you for the work you've done, Bill, and with the VIPs and the efforts you've made to get this story out. Obviously, the media doesn't want to cover it. You've been given very little coverage. When you did the original VIPs report, there was an effort by, I think it was Patrick Lawrence in The Nation to get the story out, and he was just blasted by everyone. So
yeah, they got rid of him for that, too.
Yeah, so I commend you for continuing that, and you've done some interviews with LaRouche PAC. You spoke recently at a Schiller Institute conference. I actually wanted to ask you about, at your presentation at that conference, you shared the podium with a Russian diplomat from the United Nations mission. And I thought that was kind of interesting, given that, according to John Bolton, the Russians are our strategic adversaries, while President Trump keeps saying he wants to work with the Russians. Given your experience in the intelligence community, do you think we can solve this problem and actually sit down and cooperate with the Russians?
Absolutely. I mean, look at it this way. Back when Obama was president, well, even before that, like when the Soviet Union broke up, the original agreement, the verbal agreement, it wasn't signed on paper, but it was a verbal agreement that the Ukrainians would turn over all their nuclear missiles to Russia to manage. So they would divest themselves of nuclear missiles. And in return, we agreed that we would not move NATO further east toward Russia. Well, when in fact that's exactly what we did. And then finally we went into do regime change according to, when Hillary Clinton was in the State Department, why we had the people from State Department, I forget the name of the woman who said it, but she said, Yachts is our guy. That's
Victoria Nuland, who by the way,
that's right.
Victoria Nuland was getting reports from Christopher Steele, who was in Ukraine at the time, who was filing reports on how to make the coup.
Wow. Yeah, well, that's part of the influence, not of the Russians necessarily, but of the Ukrainians too. But at any rate, when we said that, I was looking at it saying, well, if you're going to invite Ukraine into NATO, why don't you also invite Russia? So be inclusive, not exclusive. Don't treat them like an enemy by excluding them and moving, NATO right up to their border. you're basically making them look like we think you're the enemy, which is what we want everybody to think, so we can have a Cold War and create and swindle the public out of more trillions of dollars for the military-industrial complex, that backs up the shadow government. They all work together to do this. So my point was, why are we being so exclusive? Why don't we be inclusive? Then maybe we can work together and make a much better world out of it.
Bill,
that's our big mistake.
Bill, I just wanted to go back to the DNC server for one sec. Do you have any knowledge or any information on who actually downloaded the information to maybe a thumb drive or something like that?
I don't, but the British ambassador Craig Murray said he met somebody who was involved in that transfer of data, and he met them on the campus of the American University here in Washington. So whoever that was that he met must have been a part of that transfer. And there may have been other people, too, so I'm sure there were others. Because some of it seemed to have been electronically transferred, like the Podesta emails, because it didn't show the FAT file format. So it didn't imply there was a storage device involved with physical transport for any period of time, before the posting. So it looked to me like that, from that point of view, there was some electronically transferred and some done by, the DNC side was done by downloads to a storage device and then some kind of transport from.
Harley, do you have anything else?
Where can people find your work so they can, if they want to read more about this? People can go to LaRouchePAC.com and get an interview that you did with Jason Ross, which was very illuminating. That's LaRouchePAC.com, but is there some other place people can find your work?
Well, the articles, we published the articles on the transfer of data and also the FAT format and so on. We published those on Consortium News. The mainstream media hasn't picked it up at all, of course, because, nobody wants to know what the truth is here, because it makes everybody look like they have to eat a rather large crow that they've been building up for over several years, So, and I keep, the thing they fail to understand is as long as they attempt to perpetuate that lie or that manipulation and fabrication, that crow only gets bigger. So, and eventually you're going to have to eat that bigger crow.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, the one thing I would say is that at LaRouchePAC, we're going after this time of reckoning. We're putting out more material every day on the corruption that was involved in the Mueller report and the selection of a special counsel, what the FBI was involved in, and so on. I've written extensively about it, and if people are interested, you can go actually send an email to me personally, and I'll give you a link to my blog where I cover this. You can send it to harleysch@gmail.com, and your listeners know I respond to their emails. Yes. So please don't sit back. As Bill is saying, if they're not stopped, they'll do it again, and it may be Venezuela. It may be Taiwan against China. Bolton is trying to screw up the whole deal with North Korea. So this crowd is very active. They're very angry that Mueller did not deliver, and they're not going to stop. So we've got to stop them. So again, feel free to send me your questions or get a link to my blog at harleysch@gmail.com.
Listen, Harley, Bill, go ahead. You want to say something, Bill?
Yeah, I was going to say that when it comes to Venezuela, we in VIPS have there's another article coming out from us very shortly talking about why we should not consider any kind of military action and so on. So, that should be out shortly. But again, we're trying to advise the president not to pay attention to Bolton and all the people who are warmongers and trying to get us to do some crazy stuff, killing people everywhere. Let's just mind our own business. I mean, the people down there in Venezuela, they know what's going on. The guy, by what he's doing, is alienating everybody down there. So let him do that, and eventually they'll get rid of him. We don't have to go in and kill a lot of people to make sure that happens. So,
I agree.
And so I think we've got an article coming out basically addressing that kind of issue.
Bill, Harley, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yep. Well, thank you for helping to get the word out.
Yep.
Okay, Dave. Talk to you soon.
All right.